James Hohmann is a national political correspondent for the Washington Post and author of the Daily 202, joining me now from Washington. Certainly a town busying by the day, James, but let's begin there. Yesterday, you wrote in the Daily 202 this, and I quote, "Trump has often used racially charged rhetoric, and his ill-informed attacks on beloved civil rights icon John Lewis this weekend underscored how unserious he is about redemption," end quote. Again, James, you wrote about that before this latest response from Donald Trump. So what'd you mean then?
Yeah, Josh, it's great to be with you. And Donald Trump just can't take a criticism lying down. You know, I think he might be sort of the sorest winner we've ever had of the presidency. And that's not even a criticism, it's just an observation. John Lewis went out there Friday, said he was an illegitimate president, which is a very debatable proposition. And Trump didn't just respond Saturday morning, he responded again Saturday night, then circled back now. This is not politics 101. This is the kind of thing that keeps a feud with a civil rights icon in the news over Martin Luther King Day weekend. This isn't a debate you win. When you're the president and you kind of punch down, you're only elevating and prompting a debate with whoever you're hitting at. So whether it's a Miss Universe or a foreign leader or a member of Congress, and I think Trump does sort of have a problem because he doesn't understand how these kinds of fights look and play now that he's about to be president in 3 days.
James, personal motivations then aside here, I was also struck, frankly, by what followed in your piece here. The incoming president is also surrounded by people who have at times been tone deaf and tin-eared when race relations come up, raising questions about who will keep his darkest instincts in check. I mean, what is the potential impact, not just of the motivations of the president-elect, but by those who would surround him?
You know, one of the most striking thing about the tweet, Josh, was Trump just assumed that John Lewis, who's African-American, represents a poor and impoverished district. Anyone who knows the Atlanta area will recognize, you know, Lewis represents Buckhead, Emory University, some of the nicest, even most affluent parts of Atlanta. And the reality is that the inner circle that Trump surrounded himself with doesn't have people who are sensitive to this sort of thing. So they make these kinds of ill-informed statements without someone saying, hey, maybe that's not a good idea, or hey, maybe we should Google to see what John Lewis's district is comprised of before we tweet this. Even the kind of, you know, the people who are going to be his top advisors, one of them ran a website called Breitbart that had a lot of headlines sort of celebrating the Confederate flag last year. Another, Reince Priebus, led the RNC when the Republican National Committee 2 years ago declared that racism was over. And so these people who are in theory going to say, hey, Mr. President, you really shouldn't say that, also really don't know how to talk about race relations.
And certainly, if nothing else, seems to look to self-fulfill a prophecy of his own making.
So true.
Meanwhile, back at the ranch then, James, the feud between the president-elect and the Intelligence Committee remains just 3 days ahead of his inauguration. But now we have a new player in that, Russian President Vladimir Putin, coming to Mr. Trump's defense, saying this morning that the Obama administration is actively trying essentially to undermine his legitimacy. Now, the irony of the president-elect being concerned about the legitimacy of a presidency notwithstanding, what do you make of it here?
Yeah, it really is sort of wild. I think Putin believes that he can flatter Trump and that will help him get some of what he wants geopolitically, including the lifting of sanctions that are really crippling his economy, maybe the West recognizing the Russian occupation of parts of Ukraine. So I think Putin sort of thinks he can play Trump. And there are a lot of Republicans here, candidly, who are very worried that he's going to succeed. In an interview Friday and in another interview Saturday, Trump basically said he was open to getting rid of the sanctions on Russia if Russia showed goodwill, which is, you know, in Trump's eyes, what Putin is doing here. The other big development was John Brennan, the outgoing director of the CIA, gave this really blistering interview to the Wall Street Journal last night in which he attacked Trump very directly, very hard, for saying what Trump was experiencing was akin to what people experienced in Nazi Germany, and talking about all the intelligence professionals who were deployed overseas. I think the sort of Trump criticizing the intelligence community really does feel like a low blow to a lot of these guys who are putting their lives on the line every day for our safety and security.
Meanwhile, while the president-elect then continues a multi-front battle of a sort here, his pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, Congressman Tom Price, stands now accused of essentially, or facing allegations rather, of insider trading. What can you tell us about not just the allegations themselves, but how they might impact his confirmation hearing set to begin tomorrow?
So I think Tom Price is going to get confirmed as the health secretary, but this is obviously anyone who was going to get appointed to oversee health care when the new president is talking about repealing the Affordable Care Act and replacing it with something new. Healthcare is more than 20% of our economy. That person is going to be a lightning rod for criticism. Tom Price is actually pretty well liked on Capitol Hill. He's very conservative, but a lot of Democrats respect him, think he's pretty smart. So they're worried. They don't want to necessarily block him because they're worried that whoever Trump picks instead of Tom Price might be worse in their view. But this new revelation, which is basically he bought stock in a company called Zimmer, then 2 or 3 days later introduces a bill to help Zimmer's bottom line. It looks really bad. There have been a couple other suggestions that he was basically doing insider trading while he was a member of the House, which is not illegal, but is unethical. And so I think he's going to get raked over the coals at his confirmation hearing tomorrow. Ultimately, I think he will get confirmed. There's a couple other Trump cabinet nominees who maybe aren't as certain as Tom Price, but a lot of balls in the air, and really a shift, I should say, from the conventional wisdom here in Washington a week ago was all of Trump's picks for the cabinet would make it through. Now it looks like Democrats are going to be able to stop at least one. We're not sure who it's going to be yet, though. Well,
and interesting, for a president-elect for whom optics is so often the most important thing, in addition to Congressman Price tomorrow, this week, we're also going to see testimony from Energy Secretary nominee Rick Perry, who proposed in 2011 to eliminate the department, and EPA Administrator in Scott Pruitt, who's a climate change skeptic and who actually sued the department in the past. Later today, Congressman Ryan Zinke, for Secretary of the Interior, a fossil fuel advocate who's questioned public use of federal lands, and for Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, who has railed against public education in so many of its forms. Certainly, it would seem, number one, if you ardently oppose a department, chances are you may be asked to lead it. But as you just mentioned, some maybe not so sure. If nothing else, who among them do you believe now may be in doubt?
The one that's in doubt is Andy Puzder. He's the CEO of the company that owns Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. He's the nominee to be Secretary of Labor. They postponed his hearing indefinitely. It was supposed to have happened, I believe, last week or this week, and now there's no date. We're hearing that he has second thoughts. There are some allegations or revelations that his ex-wife in the past accused him of domestic violence. A couple other shoes out there that might drop soon. The one I'm watching for today that's super interesting is Betsy DeVos, who you mentioned. They scheduled her hearing late in the day to minimize how much public attention it gets. This woman, Betsy DeVos, is a billionaire. She married into the Amway fortune, and she has not done necessarily well in her practice sessions. So they scheduled her hearing late in the day so that we wouldn't have as much, how many reporters there, that TV wouldn't pay as much attention to it. And I think that that's a sign that they're pretty worried about how she might do. So I'm actually going to head over there to see for myself.
All right, well then let's get you out of there. Should be fascinating to be sure.
It will be.
James Hohmann of the Washington Post, as always, very much appreciate the insight, James.
My pleasure, thanks.